If this table looks like the stuff your nightmares are made of, stick around. We're gonna talk about all of these wiring harnesses and how we're gonna go about putting them in this truck, and then we're gonna get to work installing them. All right, so this is just kind of a quick visual, simplified breakdown of how all these things are gonna integrate with one another. And really the center here, this is signifying the battery, specifically the positive terminal off the battery. And then we've got our ground here, which could be either from the battery or could be a ground source like the chassis or the cab itself, because all of that stuff will be grounded to the battery. So really when it comes down to all these center wires, it can look confusing, but all this is signifying is that each of these 4 boxes requires power and ground, okay? Now outside of that, how do these boxes communicate with one another? The ECU box and the CDI box have a harness that runs between them, and that's going to allow communication between these two that controls fuel with the ECU and spark with the CDI box. Now, on the ECU, there is a separate harness as an auxiliary output that's going to take all the information that we're collecting from all of our sensors. So the oil pressure sensor, temp sensor, fuel pressure, all that stuff can be communicated back to this Holley BIM box that connects with the Dakota Digital gauges. So we'll have a harness that runs to this box, and then we'll have there will be inputs coming in from the ECU, then there will be outputs coming out of this box to our Dakota Digital gauges box. Now that's not the only outputs we're gonna need. We are gonna need some inputs also from our chassis harness. So you can see there's nothing that feeds back into the chassis harness. There's only outputs that come off the chassis into the gauges. Likewise, the gauges aren't feeding information anywhere else. All of the information from the gauges is incoming. So that's the last stop for the gauges themselves. Unlike the ECU and the CDI system, which can communicate back and forth with one another, and there's going to be signals being received into this ECU and CDI box from the distributor in the coil, from the sensors on the engine. And then there's these outputs, one that's going to feed up to the ECU from the CDI and out from the ECU to the Holley BIM. So very simplified version. Hopefully this will help clear up some confusion about how all these things talk to one another and communicate back and forth. All that's left to do now is to jump in and get into the wiring. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the painless wiring system, because we need to mount the fuse box for that, as well as the auxiliary relay box that I purchased. I want to go through quickly the wiring harness on the painless system and give you a quick tip that'll help eliminate a lot of confusion as you're wiring, and really only takes about a half an hour of your time. So this is the painless wiring harness. This is the fuse box here and all of the wiring that comes with this harness. There are a few other plug-in adapters and things like that depending on the year of truck you're operating, but for the most part this is 90% of the kit right here. This can look super confusing, I get that. So one of the nice things that Painless Wiring has done is they've split this harness into 5 different zones. You have a driver's side front harness, a passenger side front harness, you have an under dash harness, you have a gauge cluster, and then last you have a rear harness. Now each of those harnesses contains the wiring that you'll need for those different zones of the vehicle. And they've also grouped them with wire ties here. Everything that runs in that zone or that area is zip tied together. Now when you get this harness, it will have wire ties on it. Those wire ties are just meant to organize this harness so it's not a complete mess in the box. Now once you twist off those twist ties, what you're left with are the groupings of wires for those 5 different zones. Now, I went a step forward. I laid this harness out in the back of the truck, and I really recommend you do this. Actually, the instructions tell you to do this. Familiarize yourself with these wires before you ever attempt to install them. So what I did was I went through and I grouped each of these wires. You have bundles that go in the same direction, but some of these bundles do different things. Here's a perfect example. This is a group of wires in the under dash section. This is the turn signal stalk that goes on the column. This one is a switch for the cargo lamp. So there are all these different groupings within those sections. Here's setup for the wiper motor. What I did was I went through and I labeled each of those sections. What that's going to allow me to do is just have quick visual representation of where each of these groups of wire goes. So when it comes time to route them, I'll have a general idea of where they need to go. And even when as far as to find all the wires that I'm not going to need. So here's a whole group of wires I marked as NA. We're not even going to worry about those because these wires all relate either to the gauges or some type of ignition control. Now, every single wire in this harness is labeled. So if you get in close, I don't know if it'll be able to focus in on this, but these are labeled as the neutral safety switch. So these are the wires for the neutral safety switch. Take about 30 minutes. Familiarize yourself with this entire harness. It's gonna take a lot of the confusion out of this process. It is so nice that Painless groups all these wires together, labels every single individual wire. They're also numbered, and there's references to those numbers in the installation manual. So they've tried to make this as simple as possible for you. Now, there are universal kits from Painless Wiring. I probably would have been better served to buy the cheaper universal kit, but then I wouldn't have things like all of these factory connectors. This one's for the headlight switch. That's why I went ahead and purchased this, because we were starting from scratch. I had none of these connectors or anything that will integrate with the factory switches. It is a more expensive kit because of those types of things, and this is meant to be a direct replacement for the factory wiring harness. So even if you've just got a hacked up wiring harness, you're not doing any of the Holley stuff, this is basically a plug and play kit for the most part. You might have to terminate some ends and do some things like that, but it's meant to be as straightforward as it can possibly be. The next thing that I want to do, I've got all these labeled. I need to get this fuse box, and we can pull the cover off this so you can see what that looks like. There's fuses and relays in this box. We need to get this mounted under the dash, as well as the auxiliary relay box that I purchased here. I'll pull the top off of that so you can see what this looks like. So this is the auxiliary relay box that I bought. This is gonna power our cooling fans and our fuel pump relay. So we need to mount that on the firewall. We need to mount this Terminator box on the firewall. The coil is going to get mounted on the exterior of the firewall. Our Hyperspark CDI box needs to be mounted on the inside of the firewall, as well as our Holley bridge module and the Dakota Digital gauges box. So you can see we have a lot of things that we need to mount up to the firewall in order to then start plugging these harnesses into these boxes and actually routing the wires. So that's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to get in the cab here, and we are going to start finding locations where we can mount all of these boxes. Now, to add one more wrinkle into the puzzle here, we have shaved this firewall. So the last thing I want to do is come in here with a bunch of self-tappers, drill them through the firewall, and have a bunch of exposed screws on the outside of the firewall. That's not what I want. So we have to figure out a way that we can mount all of these boxes without drilling any holes into the firewall. And I have a few ideas for that. So once we decide where we're going to mount these up, we'll go through exactly how I'm going to mount these boxes without drilling any holes into the firewall. All right, so I know I said I was going to jump right into mounting the fuse box, but I started thinking about it, and there's a good number of wires in this harness that we're not going to need. As we talked about, the oil pressure, temperature sensors, all that stuff we're not going to use. All the alternator wires that are in this kit are going to be completely useless because the CVF Racing kit that we put on the front has a high output alternator. It's a one-wire alternator. It has a built-in voltage regulator. That's how one-wire alternators work. So the original voltage regulator for this truck we don't need, and this wiring harness is set up for all the original electronics. So it's got all of the wires that go into that voltage regulator from the alternator and then back to the battery. So all that wiring can be eliminated. And just to show you guys here, well, first I'll show you the kit that I bought. The Painless Wiring kit that I bought is number 10117 there. It's the full harness, replacement harness without the switches. So what I've already done, because we are also going to run all of the passenger side lights together with the driver's side lights in one single harness, up the driver's side inner fender and over the core support. So I've already split those wires out of this passenger side harness, which is this right here, and I've rerouted them down into the driver's side harness, which is all that stuff is zip tied and sorted. Now I'm going to remove, so you see I've got a big bundle here. This is like the engine control bundle here. So we're gonna take this bundle, we're gonna take this bundle, which has all of our alternator and voltage regulator lines. We're gonna peel all of those back, all the way back to the fuse block here, and separate those out as their own bundle. And we're gonna just coil those up, leave them bundled up. When we install all the wiring, we're gonna leave those dangling. And the reason for that is once we get this wired up, if I missed a wire, if there's something that I should be there that's not there, that will be the time to remove that from our bundle of wires that we think we're gonna remove and get it run where it needs to go. Then when we've got everything sorted, everything works, all of the electronics are working in the truck's running, we can then come in and actually de-pin all of these wires from the back of the fuse box. I'm gonna go ahead and get to peeling these wires back, all the way back to this harness, and then peel those 2 bundles all the way back to our fuse box. I did something I probably should have done a long time ago. I pulled the dash out of this thing, and it's extremely simple, and I don't know why I was worried about it. I think in my head I thought it was tack welded to the sides of the cab, but it's 5 screws and 2 bolts, and it comes right out. I had everything else disconnected, actually be 3 bolts, because the center mount I had already removed the bolt out of the center mount prior to this. But the good news is now we're going to be able to really clean up this dash. I'll clean all this up. We'll repaint this all satin black. We'll clean the back side up because it's got a little bit of surface rust on it, and we'll get that all shot with some paint as well. So that's the good news. You know what? There's really not any bad news. And getting in here, I didn't really find any additional rust that I wasn't aware of. Everything is actually fairly clean in here. But I probably should have just pulled that off a while ago. It would have made my life a whole lot easier. So I went ahead and I removed the defrost ducting, and then I also removed our main wiring harness hanger here. And what I'm trying to work on now is a mount for the Holley ECU and the CDI box. Now I'm trying to mount these in such a way that they won't get in the way of any future AC or heat system. So the easy thing to do would be to mount them up under this space. There's all kinds of room here because we don't have the heater box, but I'm chosen not to do that. So I'm going to try and mount them just offset from the very center of the console where the heater controls and the radio are. They'll be offset just behind that, and then normally you would have your defrost ducting here. We're not going to impede that as well. I am going to put the defrost ducting back in. I pulled it out for now just so I could be able to see what I'm doing here, but we are going to eventually put that back in so that when we do connect our heat and our AC, it's already installed and ready to go. So what I've decided is I'm going to hang those 2 boxes vertically right here, but I was really struggling with how or where. So I was thinking about it this weekend, and I thought I would come in here and I would weld a couple tabs onto the bottom of the dash here. But then once I started pulling things apart, I realized it's going to be much easier to hang something right off of these holes where our wire hanger goes. So we're going to modify that up a bit. I've got to design up this bracket still. I haven't yet designed it up. I'm working on that right now. So I'm going to get that designed up. What I decided for the other side is, if you can imagine this in the inverse, where the fuse box goes, it kind of goes up in the corner over here. I'm going to take a little piece of steel and I am going to weld it up into the cowling here and then down to that bracket holder that we made for the fuse box before. So we'll still be able to screw the fuse box on, but that'll be actually welded to the upper cowling here. So that's what I decided to do over there. I've already got a stencil made out for that. Now I need to make a bracket for this, and we'll get that stenciled and cut up as well. I designed up this bracket here, and I think you guys get the idea. It's going to be a 2-piece bracket. This is going to bolt up to the dash. On this side, we're going to put a 1/4 20 bolt in, and that's going to hang most of our weight. This side is where the screw runs through the wire loom up there, so we're going to keep that screw in place, and that should just help pinch that, keep that tight, but most of the weight will be hanging off the bolt up here. We'll have riv nuts in this top bracket, and we'll drill holes in this lower bracket so that we can slide this up into place, knock our bolts in on either side. Likewise, we'll put riv nuts down on the bottom side here. We'll have to drill 2 holes in the bottom of our dash, and we'll run some button head bolts up through the bottom of the dash, and that's going to hold this bracket in place from the top and the bottom. The Terminator X ECU is going to sit on the side facing the dash, and you can see I went ahead and I notched out for the indicator lights, so we will be able to actually read the indicator lights from the bottom side of the dash if necessary. I'm probably going to mount these with riv nuts onto this bracket as well, and we'll put some standoffs on here to help keep this, to keep maybe a little bit of airflow going behind the box here, keep it from overheating. I don't know if that's a common issue or not, but I kind of like the idea of having these a standoff on these because we're going to be mounting these 2 boxes back to back, and putting some standoffs on there will actually allow for the threads from one side to go through the panel and protrude on the back side of the panel without interfering with the box, if these are both stood off of this panel by, say, 1/4 of an inch or so. And then on the back side, the ignition box will be mounted in a similar fashion. So this is about the best bracket I think I could come up with. I thought about this long and hard for a very long time, and I think this is going to keep everything low enough so that it doesn't interfere with the vents, it doesn't interfere with the radio or the AC controls on this side. The only thing that may eventually be an issue is routing of ducts from one side to the other, but I'm sure we can figure some kind of workaround around that. Now, I did cut in a little window up here so we could have some wire pass through. When the wires come up, they'll be able to pass through this side and connect up to whatever they need to connect to off of the Terminator X setup here. On the other side, this is kind of what I was talking about for that fuse box. I'm just going to cut a little piece of metal here. This side's going to weld up to the cowl. The lower side's going to weld up to that square stock that I put the riv nuts in. We're going to put this tight to the firewall and weld it up onto the cowl, and that should hold the fuse box in place nicely without having to put any holes in the firewall. So I'm going to cut up these 3 pieces of metal, get this one bent up into shape, start getting our riv nuts put into place, and see if this idea works. We are just about finished up with this mount. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Now, the one issue I have yet is I had a kit of button head screws here, and I thought they'd be long enough. They are not long enough for me to stand off the boxes. You can see now with the riv nuts coming through on the back side, I need to stand the box off so that we can get all 4 bolts in. Right now I've just got 2 in each box. You can see they're not evenly attached to the bracket here. But once I get those longer bolts, we'll be able to put a little nut on the bolt as we screw it in to be act as a standoff, so then this can slide in and we won't have any issues with the boxes rubbing on the back of the riv nuts on the opposite side. So that's the goal there. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I've been stressing about this quite a bit. Lost sleep a couple nights trying to think of how I was going to make this work. I really should have pulled the dash apart sooner, because once I had the dash apart, it was very easy for me to see a path forward, and it really came together pretty quickly here. So I'm happy with how this looks. I'm going to go throw it in the truck now. The last thing I'm going to have to do after we get this put under the dash is to drill the 2 holes into the dash panel itself, and I've got those marked out already. So we'll be able to drill those out, and then we'll be able to bolt all this in and finally start wiring up the Holley Terminator system and the Hyperspark system. Now, the only other thing I need to do, I'm going to mount this, make sure everything fits in there. We're going to loosely throw the dash panel back in one more time. And as long as everything looks good, we're going to blow this apart one more time and paint all these panels up just so they're nice and clean and we don't get any surface rust down the road. So right now, I'm just going to bolt this in for one last test fitment, and we'll see where we stand. This piece up here is really the piece that kind of made it all happen. I was really struggling to figure out how to get the top of a bracket tied into the dash. And this is the part where I say taking the dash apart helped me better understand options available to me. Otherwise, I would have never figured this out. Okay, now we'll throw in our bolts here. And you can see I counted for the Terminator setup here with the wires the way I kind of put my tab split here so that there's area here for wires to pass around and through. Same here, I can just go up and over this bracket. Right off the bat, I can see we're in really good shape here because this is our center brace for the dash. So all this is going to sit really nice and in line, just like that. Get bolted to the bottom of the dash. We still have our window so we can see the bottom of our Terminator system for those indicator lights if we need to do any troubleshooting. This is perfect. I love it. I am gonna throw in the dash real quick just to confirm that everything lines up and will be plenty sturdy. All right, so you guys can see now it's actually really even hard to see the Terminator box once it's in there. It's tucked up really nice right behind the dash here, where it's going to be out of the way of everything. We're not interfering with the dash at all. Like I said, the one thing that will probably be a problem down the line is when we do the AC system, getting a duct hooked up through this area. This is not the correct box for this, but I am going to just stick that in there to see about depth. So we've got a few inches between the back of that vent box and our bracket there. So we'll be able to figure something out. Even if I have to make a custom turnout or something for the center vents to get air, we'll be able to figure something out there. It won't be too bad. Yeah, and you can see it doesn't interfere with anything at all in the center of the dash here. We're wide open, clear spaces. And we've got a lot of space up between the firewall and the back of our boxes there. So we're going to be able to run all of our wires where we need to run them. It's a nice clean install. You're never even going to know it's there. Honestly, you can't even see it from the bottom side. Like, you can't see it at all. All right, so where we left off yesterday, I was just getting those Holley brackets all painted up. And tonight, as you guys just saw in a little time lapse there, we've been getting the firewall and the rest of the accessories ready to go so we can start bolting everything back in and getting it wired up. I'm gonna bring you in real quick and we'll take a look at everything that I've done so far this evening, and I'll get you guys caught up. All right, so the first thing I did this evening was I welded in that bracket that I made up for my fuse box here. It's tight up against the firewall there. The only thing I'm gonna have to watch is if this thing gets to vibrating, it may make a little noise on the firewall there. If that's the case, we'll put a little padding or a little piece of rubber behind that bracket. I wasn't thinking about that when I welded it in close, but it's not quite touching, so you can hear if it gets to bouncing, it might make some noise, but I will know where that's coming from, so we can wedge a little piece of foam back there or something if that's the case. We took that square tube, we welded this bracket onto the square tube, then welded this bracket up to the cowl panel up here, so we're not welding directly onto the firewall. And then I cut out over here, I cut out where our Holley harness is going to pass through the firewall. We're going to use a two-piece machine grommet for this, and I'll show you guys what that looks like in a second. The other thing I did was I drilled through the firewall up here, and you can see the riv nuts back there for the coil. Let's actually go around to the firewall side. And here on the firewall, you can see I've got the coil all mounted up permanently with riv nuts there, so it is removable. If for some reason that coil were to crap out, we wouldn't have to worry about getting a wrench up on the firewall to try and unbolt things. I've been using riv nuts for most of these applications here just to make it easier on myself if something should ever need to be serviced. Now this machined grommet is what we're going to be using to pass our wires through on the firewall down here. It's going to bolt in place on the firewall there. And the reason that I did that is so that I could pass my harness plugs through that opening, and then this machine grommet is going to hold those wires in place away from any sharp metal. It's got all the rounded edges in here. It's going to clean up the look of the firewall quite a bit. And what you do is you actually take these top two bolts out, and then this is a two-piece system here, so you can actually slide this around the wires. You don't have to disconnect any of the plugs. You don't have to depin anything. It'll slide around the wires, put it around the wires, you slide it up to the firewall, and you bolt it in. All right, not gonna lie to you guys, getting this grommet, this aluminum grommet put in place took way longer than it should have. I was wrong on my wiring the first go around. I tried leaving this ignition wire out because I thought this plugged back into the box, but this actually plugs into the distributor up here. So I had to pull that back through. When I put it through, I thought, oh, I'll run it with this ignition wiring, but the way it's attached to the main harness, it didn't leave me enough length to plug in my oil pressure line, which is actually pretty short here. I'm gonna have to pull this line through and figure out how to secure the harness so that it doesn't pull back on me. But I've got everything else plugged in. So this Holley system is really straightforward, guys. Everything's labeled. So coolant temp sense, CTS. Our ignition plug here, there's an adapter to run the Holley Hyperspark to the Terminator box here. That's what this adapter is, this plug to this plug here. And then this plug is off of the Holley Terminator box. The oil pressure sensor down here, and then the O2 sensor, which I've got just laid in down here because we haven't put in our O2 bung on the header yet. We'll have to do that. Then the main harness connection here, the main bulkhead connection there, we got that plugged in. And then lastly, there's an auxiliary map sensor that's not plugged in. That's what this guy is down here. So this is like if we wanted to run an aftermarket map sensor, something other than what the ECU has attached to it, which is a 1-bar sensor. So we've just got that dangling down there for now. We've got our coil plugged in here, and that runs to our CDI box on the inside through our upper hole here. So this is a nice little clean setup. Now this isn't as clean as we're gonna do this. Obviously I'll come in here, I'll trim up zip ties, and I'm actually gonna bundle some things up and loom some stuff together. Like these 3 wires up to here will get loomed together with some shrink tubing, and then they're individually loomed past that. So we'll clean that up down the road. We'll clean up some of this. I'll put some individual loom on these little wires just to clean those up so the wires aren't exposed. Everything that the Holley system needs except for the O2 sensor is all plugged in and ready to go here. I do still need to make a coil wire from my coil pack to my distributor. And you can see like the way we routed everything here, is very tidy, and I haven't even cleaned it all up yet. And this is just like the initial running of the wire. Now let's go around to the inside of the truck, because that's where most of the magic has happened here. I went ahead and I got my boxes mounted up on my bracket here. And what I did was, there's a lot of excess wire in the harness. Now, I could go through this harness and shorten it up, and that would take a very long time, because I'd have to depin all these connections, make sure they get all back in the right position once they're depinned. But rather than do that, what I did was I put a couple of wire hangers here with a rubber isolator on them, and I looped our harness around just one time. And that was enough to take up all the slack, and what it left hanging was actually perfect. This is the fuse, one of the fuses for these boxes. It's going to be able to bolt right to the bottom of the dash. This is one of the relays. That's going to be able to be zip tied right up to the bottom side of the dash down here. So it'll be accessible. The only fuse that I'm not going to be able to have completely accessible is the main harness power fuse here. And that will essentially be right behind the radio and the cooling system. So in a pinch, if anything ever goes horribly wrong, I suppose we could take the radio out and get to that, or kind of fish it back out through the bottom of the dash here. It's just going to be a little bit of a pain on that one. I couldn't make that work with the way I had this Terminator box mounted. And then, like I said, I threw in these isolators just to be extra certain, to keep it away from the sharp edges of our bracket here. Everything is protected with this nice plastic loom, so it should be all protected really nicely. I don't think I'm going to have any issues there. So what do we have left to connect to the Holley system? Essentially, I've got power and ground to hook up. My red wire with the white on it here is a keyed 12-volt ignition. This red wire coming off the CDI box is also a keyed 12-volt ignition, and our white here is a points trigger. That comes off of the Terminator box over to our CDI box here. So these white wires will get shortened up significantly. They'll be just connected like that basically, and all that excess will go away. I'll probably run the red wire here from our CDI box over in this area to connect up with this 12-volt keyed power wire. We'll put those in together, and then we'll run an additional wire over to our ignition here for a keyed 12-volt power. Filming these wiring videos is a little tough, because I'm not sure what all is going to be interesting and what's not, and it's so much tedious work that it's actually, and it takes a little bit of mental capacity to be like remembering what exactly I'm doing and what's going where. So I just did a ton of work without filming, and I'm going to get you guys caught up right now. So first off, you guys did see me hook up the power wires for the Holley ECU and the Holley CDI box, okay? So I've got these now connected to the battery. I've run my power wires down through up here, and you can see I cleaned this all up really nice as well. So this is the only thing that I've really loomed so far. Now the other thing that I did here, once I got all my main power wires run and cleaned up, I ran an auxiliary power wire down to the starter through this grommet as well, and that's powering my relay box. I decided to put my relay box on the passenger side here, and I went ahead and I just screwed that in. I test fit it, make sure we could have access to this when the dash is in place. This is a door switch I haven't replaced yet, but that's just going to run down inside the door there. And I've got my relay box all wired up, except for power to my fans and my fuel pump. So I've got my trigger wires for the two fans and the fuel pump all wired up. I've got the box grounded. I've got power run to it. Now I just need to run power to each individual fan and to the fuel pump. And I've got all these labeled here so I know where they go when it comes time to run those power wires. So I'm gonna have to get a little bit more power wire, because we need to run this all the way across the dash, out through the grommet that runs out underneath the fender. We'll have to run 2 wires forward and 1 back to the fuel pump. Coming this way, I have not cleaned up any of the wiring going over this direction yet. So pretty much from here over, eventually once I run these power wires, we are gonna loom all of this as well, just to keep it nice and tidy, keep it clean, keep it organized. The engine side here, I've got the starter all hooked up. So this is that group of power wires that I run down to the power lug off of the starter here. That's where I'm pulling power from. The battery comes straight to this, and then we're drawing power for our relay box for the painless system right directly off of that lug. I've got my ignition wire attached here. Grounding, I still need to ground the chassis to the block and the block to the cab here. We're gonna do that coming up here in the next video. For the exciting part, I went ahead and I wired up the ignition switch, not tested anything yet. So we're gonna be able to see right now if this thing is actually gonna crank over. Fingers crossed, guys. This is a huge moment. I'm actually super nervous about this because just integrating all three of these systems has been weighing on my mind kind of heavily here. It's just been a lot of thought process that's gone into trying to make sure everything is organized right. I have the right wires to the right system going to the right place. It's not all that difficult, in all honesty. It just requires a little bit of brain power and a little bit of foresight. Fingers crossed, we should be able to hear the engine crank, and we should be able to see the Terminator power up. Now, I've got the ignition switch wired up here, but I do not have a neutral safety switch yet. So we just have the neutral safety switch wires jumpered to one another. Once we get the clutch pedal and the hydraulics set up for that, we'll figure out where the stop is gonna be for this. And on that stop, we'll put a pressure switch. So essentially the clutch will have to be depressed in order to start the truck. It's gonna keep us from starting the truck in gear and having a runaway truck situation, kind of like that International when it jumped from park to reverse on me. All right, moment of truth here, guys. I don't have the key, the core of the switch in yet, but if I turn this over, we should be able to hear this thing crank. Okay, that's accessory. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Yes! Yes! Yeah! Yes! Oh my gosh, that is such a huge relief. I got goosebumps. That's freaking first time we've heard this thing crank over. I'm so dang excited right now. Okay, that's all right. You guys can tell I'm excited about this. All right, that's number one. Number two, the only thing that I need to power up the Holley system is an accessory. Is a keyed ignition. So I've got the keyed ignition wire stripped back here. We're gonna bring it back to our ignition switch here, and I'm gonna jump off the accessory wire on the back of the ignition switch here, and we should be able to see the Terminator box power up. I've just got it jammed up in here for us to see if we've got it wired up properly and it fires up, okay? So let me just shut this back off. Okay, that's off. I don't know how good of a connection I'm gonna get here, so I'm gonna try to, like I said, I've got my wire stripped. The brown wire here, the brown and black wire, is our keyed accessory, 12-volt keyed accessory. Okay, I kick this on, we should get Holley power. Boom. Oh, yes, 2 for 2. Freaking yes. Okay. It's asking me to do the setup wizard, which we're not gonna do just yet because we're not quite ready for that. But this is super exciting, guys. Oh my God. So we're freaking 2 for 2. This is awesome. Oh my gosh, that's such a relief. Woo. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, all right. It's late here, so I'm trying not to scream and yell either because I'm friggin' pumped up right now. All right, that has got me fired up, guys. That is where I'm gonna end this episode. A little bit of a teaser here. The next video that I put out on the wiring, because I've got a couple other things going on and I don't wanna leave you guys in suspense for too long here, but the next video that I put out on wiring, we're starting this truck. We are going to start this truck. What I've got to do for us to get to that point, I've got to wire the fuel pump up, and then up under the dash here, like the Holley system's ready to go. We just need to wire in a keyed ignition. We need to hook up a throttle cable and the throttle pedal. We need to put in belts, and we need to put in the radiator and hoses. I am going to try my best to get all of that done in one shot, in one video, and then hopefully fire this thing up. And if this thing fires up, it's gonna friggin' fire me up, because I can't believe I just got to hear this thing crank over. My God, it's so freaking exciting, guys. Like, you have no idea. You have no freaking idea how much that, like, just shot my motivation through the roof. Okay, all right, it's time for me to clean up. It's late, but guys, I'm only able to be this far into this project. I say quick, because we're talking frame off truck rebuild, massive rust repair in under 2 years right now. That's where we're at. And I'm only able to do that because I get out in the garage every week and I put the work in. And it's not like you have to go out and grind every single day, every single week. Just get out in the garage, make a little progress every week, 30 minutes, an hour, 8 hours if you have the time. Whatever time you can put in every week, put a little bit in, because if you don't work on your project, it will not work on itself. Get out in the garage, get building, and I'll see you on the next episode of Cody Builds.